remember to keep your microphones muted for the time being, so we don't get any feedback on presentations. That would be great. We've got over 100 people in the meeting, or just about 100 people in the meeting, which is fantastic. So thank you all very much for joining us from wherever you're tuning in from. Just so the format of what we're going to do is we've got two speakers who will speak relatively briefly. Sorry, I got a little bit of feedback there. So we've got two speakers who will speak briefly just to outline some of the issues involved in setting up a Museum of the Troubles. I'm then going to invite anyone else associated with the Museum of the Troubles and Peace Project who wants to contribute to say a few words. Then we're going to open it up to a general forum and encourage people to put forward questions, comments, critiques, everything that's relevant so long as it's constructive and of course civil. So the background to this discussion is a few years ago, I think 2018, there was a kind of newspaper conversation, I suppose is the best way to put it, in a number of papers in the Belfast Telegraph and the Irish Times on this question of whether we needed or should have, or whether it was appropriate to have a Museum of the Troubles. There were contributions in that debate from Liam Kennedy, who I think is in the call, from Jack Foster, from Fiona Meredith, and others. There's been a number of contributions in the academic literature and the museums associations and museum specialist literature about whether and what might be in museum representations of the Troubles. We've had in recent years a number of important initiatives from the Ulster Museum in the opening of the redeveloped Troubles Gallery in the Ulster Museum in Belfast, in the redevelopment and reopening of the Museum of Free Derry in Derry as well. So there's a lot of things happening in the representation of the Troubles space. And one of the things that's also happening is a developing project to establish a dedicated and freestanding Museum of the Troubles and Peace in Belfast. Information about that project is available on the website of the project, which is museumofthetroubles.org, if anyone wants to follow that up. Museum of the Troubles with no spaces or punctuation, then .org. And our two speakers this afternoon are both associated with that project, and they're going to get us going with this debate today. The first is Dr. Irene Boada Montagut, who's the project manager for the Museum of Troubles and Peace. She's a former correspondent for Spanish media and TV and radio presenter. She's now based in Belfast. So Irene's going to speak first. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Olwen Purdue, who's my colleague in Queen's University Belfast, senior lecturer in Irish social history and the director of the Centre for Public History at Queen's. Olwen's published widely on the social history of Ulster in the 19th and 20th century, but also and increasingly on the field of the public history of difficult pasts. And Olwen has been an advisor to the project team on the Museum of the Troubles as well. So I'm going to hand over to Irene first. I think, Irene, you want me to run your slides, yes? Can't hear you, Irene. You need to unmute yourself.
Yes, here
Excellent.
I am.
Okay, right.
You can hear me now.
I can. Yeah, so I'll put your slides up, and then when you're ready.
Right. So thank you so much, Peter Gray and the Institute, to be here today. Can you hear me all right? Yes. Okay. So thanks very much to having this opportunity. Thanks to you all for this, to come along. I know how busy you are, all of you, and it's absolutely fantastic that you're here. I would say that the fact that you are here, so many of you, means that this, actually, Peter, that was...
Yeah, sorry, it's the wrong slides. Apologies.
But the fact, I think, that so many of you are here means that you have been thinking about this possibility, which is a very good thing. Because if we go ahead with this option, we certainly need your help, everybody's help. It's going to be a massive project. And basically today I'm here to tell you a little bit about this. This is our organization, Museum of the Troubles and Peace. And this is our website, and this is our vision, exploring the past, inspiring the future. And that's exactly what we are about. We are a group of people trying to create a museum. It can be called museum, it can be called differently. This is a working title at the moment, but a big funding. It requires a bit funding because it'll be an important building, a big central building, hoping to show to have a space for learning about what happened through the Troubles, but at the same time, it wants to be a shared space and a space where people can learn and reflect through about the Troubles and peace building. It would be a living space as well, a vibrant place where people can, national and international community, contribute on different thoughts, different reflections on what happened during the Troubles. And when we talk about the Troubles, we talk about conflict, but we also want to highlight the resilience of people who lived through Troubles. That would be a very important element in our museum. So basically, I want to emphasize the fact. Peter, are you going to be moving the slides?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. So the fact that, as I said, it's a shared space, a space to gather, and very important, and that's crucial to our project. All traditions should be included, all angles, and to have good debates and good reflection on all of this, on what happened. The museum would provide safe space where people can be together, where young people can learn from each other, and where there could be a space for therapy, for art therapy, for example. So being inclusive is very important. You can pass to the other slide, Peter. And as I said, it would be local and it would be global. So it would be for people here. And we would like also to promote all the museums which already exist and do wonderful work. All the museums, we call it the 3R Museum Network. 3R in the sense that it would promote remembrance, reflection, and reconciliation. And that includes all the museums, small or medium size, of different types, and also different exhibitions, like the exhibition, for example, in the Ulster Museum. All those would be in this network, of course, if they want to be included, of course. That's what we think it could happen, right? And also it would be a global museum in the sense that the Troubles is a world-class problem in miniature. There's a lot we can contribute to other societies which experience similar problems. And when we talk about this, I can talk about myself. I mean, I came here partly because I come also from a divided society. And it's a society which has a problem. I mean, now has a problem in Spain. We have part of our government in Catalonia in prison or in exile. And I think partly this is due that we were not able to confront the past. We were not able to reflect together on the past. We don't have any museum of this sort. And there was an agreement after Francoism of trying to forget what happened. And I don't think Spain is a very good example of how to forget and not to talk and not to reflect. I don't think it works at all to create a better future for future generations. So you can pass to the other ones if you like, Peter. We think it should be in an iconic building, and it should be a landmark of this country. Because we hope that many people from other countries could come and visit it, as we said, from other divided societies, and also families who want to come here with their children and spend time in a place in which they are going to work, they're going to learn about peace building. So it would be an education. The education bit would be very important in what we are hoping to have. And we are hoping that schools, we would be working with schools, and North and South would visit. Not long ago, it was said in the South, in media, that the people in the South know very little about the troubles and about the North. Well, this would be an opportunity so that we had visitors from down South. As I say, it's very important that this wouldn't be a war museum. It would be a museum in which it's important how the resilience of people, how people worked through the troubles, and we would like to highlight the idea of life goes on that Van Morrison and Seamus Heaney have used in their poetry. You can go on with the next one, Peter. Yes, and the next one, because we have talked already about the museums network. And I think if museums in South Africa, like the one we're seeing here, museums in South Africa, in Lebanon, in Chile, in other societies have been able to have a museum of this type, that means you can pass on the other ones as well, Peter. I think that means that the other ones, this is some women doing art therapy, I think, in South Africa. And you can also see other pictures of the disappeared in Chile. And Beirut is the next one, I think. Yes, very impressive building. So we have already approached those museums, and we would like to be working with them. So we would. So this project, you can pass for the next one. It's a project that we have the patrons. We have very distinguished patrons. They all are happy with our ideas of setting up a big investment like this for Northern Ireland. So. And I think there's still another one, Peter. Yes, and we need your support and our email. So yeah, we can finish with that one. And basically, Peter, what I like to say is that yes, it is a very. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our experience in the last few years that we've been working with different groups. We've been approaching different people in the worlds of organizations, in community organizations. We've approached, I would say, hundreds of people in universities, in people doing community work. Women's centers. We have talked to many people in government at different levels. We have approached possible funders. And I must say, in the last couple of years that we've been doing this work, I have found that there's enthusiasm. And this is another way to prove it. There are lots of people in this session today with ideas to share, hopefully. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm. In some areas, some people were a little bit skeptical at the beginning, but then eventually they were enthusiastic about this idea. And we much more than we thought initially. So I think it is doable. It can be done. I mean, we in our group of people, we would like to be working with all of you, or many of you, if you're interested. I mean, the people who are interested, because we need a big effort, massive effort as a society to have a center like that, which I think would be very good for our present and for our future, for our political situation, and also in general for us as society, having an important central space where people can be together, spend time together, and help each other. Because at the end of the day, the only way we can get through this is really helping each other. And being on our own, we're never going to, just on our own doesn't mean, I don't think we can reach very far. We really have to do a lot of being together, a lot of work, a lot of dialogue, and this would provide for our youth. Many people, youngsters, didn't live through the troubles. They want to know other perspectives, perhaps, of what they have heard at home, and that would be an opportunity for everybody, whether they go to university or they don't go to university, to have a space in the center of town that we easily access. When I say the center, I mean easily accessed. It could be using an interface area, or it can be in the center of a big city like Belfast. We shouldn't be getting stuck on those conversations, the name, the place. We'll find a solution for it all. We have very good universities here, and I'm sure we have many good academics who would be willing to help with this massive effort. I think we should all help each other to have the confidence that this can be done. And really, after talking to loads and loads of people in the last few years, I realized it is possible to do it. And we're very happy to talk to people, whether they think it's good or not, to be talking, to be engaging. And I must say, everybody I have reached, everybody wanted to engage somehow with this project. And for people with small museums, when I say small, I don't say it in a negative way, sorry. I mean, not huge investments. I can say we can get many more visitors for your museums if we work together. If we work together in a network, we'll be able to bring many more visitors and many more opportunities for your museums. Basically, that's what I like to finish here, basically asking you for help to make this dream a reality, and to please be in contact with us, and let's do this together. And we have some questions for you, but Olwen, Purdue, thank you. I think you're going to talk a little bit more about this.
Thank you, Irene. I really appreciate you inviting me along today, and also you taking the time to share with us your vision for the Museum of the Troubles in Peace. Irene has asked me to share some general thoughts about the concept of a Museum of the Troubles and what its role in Northern Ireland might be. And I'm going to do it very, very briefly, because I'm conscious that what we really need here is to hear from you and to hear some discussion. But I want to share through a few thoughts that I hope might provoke that discussion, and ask what part such an initiative might play in dealing with troubled past and dealing with legacies of violence. For example, and particularly, could and should a museum effectively address such difficult topics? And something for us to discuss later, how would a museum do such a thing? Here in Northern Ireland, we've had our share of difficult pasts, and their past is still, for many of us, linger on into the present. And things that have happened have caused deep wounds that in some cases are clearly visible, and in others are invisible, but nonetheless real for that. Many of these wounds are never discussed. They're never shared, and therefore they're never fully addressed. But the legacy is there. For many of us, thankfully, you know, the conflict, as it were, is part of history. And I got such a shock a few years ago when I realised that the undergraduates in my history class hadn't been born when the peace process happened and the Good Friday Agreement was signed. It made me feel very old indeed. But although in that case it is part of history, as I said, the legacy is still very much with us today, and nowhere more obvious, I think, than in the high levels of mental health issues that still exist in our society, unfortunately. So the question is then, for us as museum professionals, as public historians, as academics, as members of the public who have knowledge of the past, knowledge of the conflict, what took us into conflict and the paths that led us into peace, what do we do with that knowledge? How do we as a society deal with those issues? And more specifically, what role, if any, do cultural institutions such as museums play in transitional or restorative justice for those who have been caught up in violence? There are many who would say, look, museums, they're not the place for this kind of topic. Museums are somewhere you take the kids on a wet Saturday afternoon. They're somewhere you used to go for a school trip when you were younger. And others argue, well, nobody goes to museums anyway. They're dull, they're lifeless, they're just cases of meaningless objects. You know, what is a museum going to do in this traumatic space? Thankfully, that's not the case. And thankfully, as many of you are aware, museums today are very, very different from that idea of what a museum used to be in some cases. Rather, I think the potential and power of museums to enable personal and social change, to confront difficult pasts and act in ways that heal and build society is increasingly being recognised. And the role of public history and cultural institutions as a form of transformative or restorative justice increasingly as seen in our society. As Irene mentioned earlier, we've seen that over the last decade, the emergence globally of some really exciting museums in response to conflict, violence and trauma. The National Museum of Memory in Boada, the Museum of Memory and Human Rights in Santiago, several museums in the US, for example, the Ground Zero Memorial Museum, or more recently, the new museum in Montgomery, Alabama, that explores the legacies of slavery and segregation and contemporary issues of mass incarceration. So museums can be and are being spaces in which these very difficult conversations can take place. But some may say, well, that's okay, that, you know, regions like South Africa or Boada, they moved on, that they can deal with it. We're not ready for that here. And to that, I have to come back to the core question I think that I want us to think about today is, what is a museum for if it's not to ask difficult questions, to jolt people out of their comfort zones and allow them to see things in new ways? I think, for example, again, we've mentioned the Museum Free Derry and National Museums Northern Ireland, both of whom are proving quite conclusively that not only are we ready in Northern Ireland to confront these pasts, but that a museum is exactly the right space in which to do that. In a fairly dramatic shift away from its previous stance of remaining strictly and sometimes painfully neutral. For example, the Ulster Museum is now addressing difficult histories head on in ways that confront, that disrupt, that challenge, but also that provide a safe space in which that can take place, in which troubling thoughts, difficult conversations and challenges and response can occur. Objects and how they're framed, how they're juxtaposed, they all have incredible power to provoke, to disrupt, to disturb, to move. And we've seen, for example, the very brave step that was taken by National Museums Northern Ireland in hosting the Weeping Willow installation. And so the vision of hundreds of poppies pouring down the front of one of Belfast's most iconic buildings was quite striking and certainly provoked a lot of discussion and a lot of response. But I think we were ready for that, and we're ready for an awful lot more. The other question, of course, just to finish with, is one that underpinned the discussions that Peter referred to earlier in the Belfast Telegraph and other newspapers, is, should we be remembering? Is it ethical? Is it desirable? Is it not, as Jack Foster said at the time, something that we should forget this stuff and move on? Let's put that behind us. I think many of us who were children during the Troubles, who saw on the TV screens the horrors of events such as Le Mans, Greystale, Enniskillen, and they became etched in our consciousness, and in many ways we'd love just to put them behind us and never think about them together. You know, Belfast is a vibrant city now. You know, it's opening up, COVID is starting to ease, and it's getting back on its feet. Forgetting is easy. And the transformation in our society today is incredible when we look back at where we were 20 or 30 years ago. And to be honest, it's my own desire never to believe that such things could never happen again and we could never go back there. But as we've seen only too recently, the divisions and unrest that have been erupting in our streets, they're there again. You know, that division that's both the cause and the legacy of our conflict. So remembering can be painful, but forgetting is a very, very dangerous thing. And in the case of our troubled past, we quickly forget where we've come from. We take our peace for granted. And in today's society, I don't think we can afford to do that. I just want you to leave you with one quote by Amy Sudaro, who has written on the role of museums in dealing with conflict. And she has said, "The memory of past violence is considered one of the surest inoculations against future violence." So just a few questions I want to leave you with as we think about this, and opening it up then for some discussion. What would be the purpose of a museum to the Troubles and Peace? Would it be for communities? Would it be a healing process, a healing space? Would it be a teaching space? Would it be for international audiences to learn more about our conflict and our peace process? How would it fit into the existing landscape of public history in Northern Ireland and Ireland as a whole? And that's something Irene again alluded to earlier, and I think that's something we want to go into in a little bit more detail. Where would it sit on the physical landscape? Is it going to be a city centre space, a greenfield site, an iconic building? Is it going to sit on the interface? Should it be in Belfast or should it be somewhere else? What would it contain? A museum has to have something in it. Maybe it doesn't. There are museums that are empty and it's the space themselves that are important. But what objects? What oral history collections, digital interactives, or simply spaces for silence? Who is the intended audience? And how, I think importantly, would such a project ensure a robust and fit for purpose set of ethics that surrounded and underpinned absolutely everything it does? So I'm going to leave you there and hopefully open up for some more discussion now. Thank you.
Olwen, thank you very much for that, and also to Irene. I think Irene just mentioned to me that Rita Duffy would like to speak. So Rita, could I invite you just to unmute yourself and say what you want to say?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm delighted to support this project. I spoke briefly with Irene about this gathering. I'm fully in support of a new museum in Belfast that deals with multiple aspects of the Troubles and what we're left to deal with. I firmly believe that if we don't face straight into the variation of truths that we're left with, that we're destined to repeat and make the mistakes that have been made in the past. And that takes bravery, that takes courage. It takes us to be, it requires us to be brave. And I don't, in all honesty, think that we've been terribly brave since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. I despair of Ulster politics. However, I don't despair of art and creativity. And I think if this museum is approached in a creative, brave and intelligent way, we might contribute something valuable, something incredibly necessary to our society. Right now, we're still dealing with the poison of sectarianism, and that comes directly out of our colonial experience. I've been doing some research on during my residency at Trinity, and by and large, the biggest problem we have to deal with in the North is that legacy of colonialism. It's very interesting what's happening in Belgium at the moment. They're completely reworking a museum of the Museum of Mankind because of the recognition of their imperialist past in the Congo. And they have to do that because the Belgian nation would not be able to function if it wasn't for the Congolese refugees and people that are living in Belgium at the moment. And we have to find a space that where we can address traditional parts of our society. I refuse to believe that we have two societies in the North, and we have to find a space to welcome and educate the new communities that are joining us and will continue to join us as global warming kicks in. I think that cultural courage is something that we need to really brace ourselves for, because sometimes the truth smarts, but it's all the better for going through. I think I would like to see that museum smack in the middle of Lanark Way, incorporating those gates of hell where young men, ignorant, uneducated young men with petrol bombs are facing ignorant young men, uneducated with petrol bombs on the other side. And I think until we come to realise the similarities and the things that we share, the desperate class divide in Northern Ireland, the fact that we have this uneducated underclass that are still fed nonsense. I did a program recently for German TV, knowing that if I walked up the Shankill Road and in around that area, I would find young Protestant men that would speak to me and that would speak to me intelligently. Unfortunately, I began on Conway Street, where my grandfather was born, and I stood on Conway Street on the Protestant side of that divide, and I met a young man and a young woman and their baby, and he began to talk to me and started to tell me why he voted DUP, why he despaired, why he believed that Hitler was the best leader ever. He knew nothing of Irish history, had been taught nothing of his own history. And I actually wanted to steal the baby and run away. That's the reality of a lot of people that are living in areas where the peace process didn't shine its light. I don't want Belfast to become singularly a weekend destination for middle-class people looking for jollies. I would actually like Belfast to become a world leader in its lived experience, to be able to kind of be brave enough to face up to that kind of masculine, knuckle-trailing, yobbo attitude. I think that once we create a space where women's voice can be heard, where the international voice can come and impact us. I spent a research trip in South America looking at museums in Argentina, in Chile. I think there's an amazing opportunity for us to grow, genuinely grow, and not do our usual kind of middle-class, polite, let's not annoy anybody type of attitude. I sat on an Arts Council board and I watched an intelligent woman keep a tally of where money was going, whether it was going to Protestant community or whether it was going to the Catholic community. I was appalled. And I think it's time that we really rolled up our sleeves and got on with addressing what we need to address, and to build peace and to build spaces where we can really get to grips with what that means. Thank you very much.
Rita, thank you very much for that extremely important contribution. But before I open it up to everyone, is there anyone else involved with the project team for the Museum of the Troubles who would like to contribute? Just kind of make yourself known, unmute yourself and speak if you'd like to now.
Sorry, Peter, can I say something?
Of course.
Yeah, I think there's some people in our group who couldn't get in because they registered a bit, they were trying to register a bit late. I'm sorry about that. I don't know if they could be included now. But Peter, can I just say as well that thanks so much, Rita. And that it's something I forgot, which I think it's important. It's about Longcash Maze. I mean, when we talk about this subject, people think about what happened. All I want to say about that is that I'm sorry because some people put a lot of energy into that project, but I would say it's important not to get stuck on things which didn't work. That happened, and for a number of reasons, it got stuck. I don't know if it will have a future or not, but I don't think there's a connection with what we're trying to do in the city center now. It's a different project, and it is important that just because something didn't work in the past, that doesn't mean we should keep trying. I think this is an important point I'd like to say. Thank you for that, Peter.
Thank you, Irene. Is there anyone else from the team would like to contribute at this stage? No, okay. For those of you unfamiliar with,
but I don't know how to put my hand up.
Oh, sorry, who's that speaking?
Jane Morris.
Jane, please, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, you know, this is a wonderful event on a Monday afternoon. It's great to see people with inspiration and aspiration and all the different things we desperately still need in this country. And you know, to follow from Rita's conversation, what I see is that the Good Friday Agreement brought us relative peace, but we haven't got reconciliation. In fact, far from it. We're very, very separate. And I was involved in the original proposal for the Maze Kesh site for a peace centre, which obviously was blocked. And so I see this, and I'm very involved in this project and glad to be. And I see this as something sitting somewhere between Anne Frank, the Anne Frank experience in Amsterdam, and the Titanic experience here. And it's something where people can learn what went wrong and how to make things better and how we achieved peace. And there are few people that are getting slightly worked up or confused maybe about the word museum, because as Olwen said, a place you go on a rainy Sunday afternoon, that is the thinking there is normally around museums. But obviously with the experience that people have had of museums around the world, it's putting a new light on what a museum is. It's a place to learn, it's a place to be educated, and it's a place to understand and forgive and not forget. And that's, if I see this as a center for that learning, then I think that's hugely valuable. And we desperately need that in Northern Ireland. And there are centres going up, and I know the Hume centres in Derry. But what I often say is, I bring many people from continental Europe on tours of Belfast, and I bring them to the Peace Wall, and their jaws drop, but there's absolutely nowhere for them to sit and have a cup of tea and talk about what they've seen, what they've learned, where to go. And often I've had Kashmiris and Turks and Cypriots in my front room talking about this. And or maybe if we're lucky to book a hotel, a room in the Europa, to have these conversations. But there's nowhere that I know of to go where people can meet. I've been to Afghanistan with the British Council talking to rural leaders. I've been to Turkey, etc. And all over the world, people are interested in what we achieved here in Northern Ireland. And not enough know that we've still got a lot and a long way to go. So yes, I think we desperately need something like this. I think it's a hugely sensitive subject and is going to need kid gloves handling it. And I believe the people we've got involved are exactly those people, and it's got a very important future if we do it right. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Jane, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know her, Jane Morris is the co-chair of the Museum of the Troubles project. So Jane, thank you very much for your contribution. I'm going to open it up to the floor. I know there's a lot of people who want to contribute. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Teams, if you look at your screen, there's a little icon at the top that has a hand or a hand and a face. If you click on that and click on the hand, that will just indicate that you want to ask a question. So I'm going to move to people speaking, I think, from the floor. So you can keep your comments short, keep them focused, and yeah, just make them constructive as constructive as possible. So I'm going to start with John Brady. So John, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question or make your point? You there, John? Can't hear you. So the
Peter, you've muted yourself now, I think.
Okay, over to you, Dom.
Oh, it was me. Okay. Listen, I'll be very brief. I'm a supporter of doing something in this space. What I'm going to do is make an alternative suggestion, and that is just to throw in an idea that the historians take a step back at this point. And I know it seems strange to suggest a museum that doesn't start with the history, but I think we put too much weight thus far in trying to understand this based on history. And what I would say is that the design of a museum needs to work with forms of social identity and social conflict, because that's what links it to what goes else on in the world. And unless we have a learning space which teaches people about group conflict and does that before you get to the history, then I think you end up with starting with things like, let's start with the facts, isn't going to work in this case. So I throw forward an idea that let's start with modeling and understanding the way intergroup conflict works, and then bring in the history later. And that will give us a comparative and thoughtful space, which allows the artists, I think, in, but also comparison with other space, other conflicts. Anyhow, that's my 10 pence worth.
Muted.
You're muted, Peter.
Sorry, I was going to say I wanted to go back to John, who I can see has his mute turned off. You there, John? Afraid we can't hear you. Okay, I think we'll have to come back to you again, John. Apologies for that. Move to Matthew Gulch.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, good. So I will also keep this very quick. I think it is a good initiative, I suppose, and anyone who has spoken to me will know where this is going. I'm wondering about the position of the rural in all this and the rural experience, because a lot of the stuff west of the Ban kind of gets swept under the rug, and even sort of this focus on Larkin Way and the interfaces and everything, that's not an experience that really registers for a lot of the rural population in sort of Fermanagh, where I'm from, and Tyrone and South Armagh and stuff. And then I suppose building on that, a lot of these museums and stuff that already exist in Belfast and Derry, Londonderry, which, I mean, is local in a sense, but it's not local to a lot of the population outside of those areas. And if you're thinking of someone in Enniskillen, there's not even a motorway to Belfast. You have to go to Dungannon before you get anywhere close to the motorway. So I suppose I'm just sort of bringing that into it to sort as a sort of maybe somewhere outside of the city, potentially the maze, but maybe not the maze.
Okay, Matthew, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Andrew. Sorry, I don't have a surname. Andrew, if you're there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't know whether you want my video, but yeah, I just want to say congratulations to Irene for being so passionate about this and showing some leadership here. And I welcome you, Irene, as someone who has come to the country, but with your own experience. And I think that's really important. I'm not saying you're neutral, but I think that's quite important. My own background is I'm actually a Church of Ireland rector in Tyrone, so I'm living with the legacy of rural conflict, and I welcome Matthew's attention on that. But I'm also a former British Army officer, and but with 7 children who call this country their home. The youngest are twins, aged 4, who are growing up here. So I think what I want to say, if it's going to be really inclusive, it's got to be inclusive of everyone. That includes people who may be labelled colonialists, who are now living here and lived here for many, many years, married girls over here and are raising children here. And I also would like to say that I think it's really important that at every point it's about hope and it's about people being inspired. And what I would like to see, particularly from a British Army point of view, that's people in Great Britain who are still can't even come back here because they're still traumatized. That there are really good examples of peace building and really good examples of reconciliation, so that people who need that inspiration can do that. So I think that's all I want to say at the moment. I think the other thing I want to say is someone said it's easy to forget. I think for those of us who had near-death experiences and lost good friends, we will never, ever forget. And I think it's so important that at the outset, that those who consider themselves to be victims or survivors are a key part of this conversation, and that there's a very respectful and sensitive way of looking at that, because otherwise this has no future. So it's got to be really got to be sensitive to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Andrew. Irene's just messaged me to say Katie Brady, who's a member of the board, would like to contribute as well. So Katie, can I ask you to just unmute yourself and speak?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I was experiencing technical difficulties earlier. Yeah, so I'm involved in this project, and I just really wanted to get the point across that the museum that I'm envisaging, as are the rest of those involved in the project, it's by no means going to be a stagnant space. And we can see from meetings like this that there are so many voices to be heard, there are so many opinions to be had. I think what we're really trying to achieve is, as I said, a non-stagnant space. It's going to be a living space, regardless of location. I know all those questions have been raised earlier, but it would be a living space that reflects the voices of today, tomorrow, yesterday, because I know for a lot of people, this history isn't confined to the past as such. It's not history. Some people are still living through it, still dealing with it. And, you know, the past couple of months, we've seen new truths emerge and various other things. So I think that's very important. And as Jane said, perhaps even the word museum might be incorrect, but that it will be a living space and it will constantly change and constantly reflect the voices of the day and the needs of the people as they change too.
Katie, thank you very much for that contribution. I can see a hand from Maureen Fadham. Maureen, do you want to ask your question? Sorry if I've kept you waiting.
Oh, no, that's no problem. Thank you so much, Peter. I'm Brooklyn in the house. I'm a scholar of Northern Irish literature, and I wanted to say just a couple quick things. One is I am in full support of this. Lots of things about this are resonating for me with issues over here and our African American population here and history. One thing I wanted, and on that note, there was an image shown of hands sort of in a circle, and I just want to react to that just really quickly and say, I think that, you know, if we could revise that, right, so that it's multiple colors on the, you know, so the question of should we remember, I think absolutely we must remember. And I think that it's so fantastic that in the case of this project, you are so clearly thinking of this museum as not just a museum, but as a multifunctional space doing so much important work. I was thinking, you know, another way perhaps to think about the work of this museum is as a community center as well. Someone had just mentioned intergroup conflict, you know, so becoming a space for that, perhaps becoming a space for truth and reconciliation of some kind that I would see anyway, personally, as part, and I see it this way here too in the States, as part of a broad project in restorative justice. Also, maybe some kind of community garden. Also, it was mentioned that the Troubles are part of history. And I just react to that a little bit like the Troubles are also part of now. And this is one reason why it's so important that this be, you know, this community center, this alive space where we're continuing to process what has happened and what is happening. Finally, you know, if I can be of support in any way, I would love to be. Thank you.
Maureen, thank you so much for that. Let's move on to Thomas. Sorry, I don't have a surname. If you're there, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Peter. It's Thomas Hennessy.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, and Don Bryant, who spoke earlier, and I were on the Commission for Flags, Identity, Culture and Tradition, which was set up to look at some of these issues. and we debated whether there should be a Museum of the Troubles or something similar to it. And I would say that the one thing, I mean, we were made up of eight independents and 7 from the main political parties in Northern Ireland. And we got bogged down in what was a victim, who was an innocent victim. And you couldn't get beyond that at all. So I would suggest that what the project seems to be, that it would be a project that you don't have politicians involved, because you'll bog down, you won't get beyond first base with that situation. And I would just say that it has to be something. I mean, that's what happened with the maze. And I would just say that I think Dom and I would agree that it would have to have multi-narratives, and it's important not to forget. It's important to remember those who are silenced by the Troubles, and I think they need to be brought and remembered. Those people who work for peace and those people who held society together during the whole period of the Troubles as well. They should be remembered as well, and their work should be remembered, as well as those involved in the conflict itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Move on to Eileen. Eileen Ware.
Hello, thanks for the invite. Very impressed with the amount of people who have joined it today. I have spoke to Irene, and I think I don't know whether you would call it a museum or not, but you know, just based on some of the stuff that Rita has said and some of the other ones, you know, we have a lot of brave people out there. You know, I live it day and daily. I'm grassroots, and a lot of the community workers out there taking risks every day in life. And I think that's the story that you need. It has to be a living story, because there's a lot of people there that I work with right across. I don't like saying Protestant Catholic, because I work with Indian community, I work with Chinese community, I work with Jewish community, and it has to be a lived experience, because I know during the worst days of the Troubles, which I was 16, so I know a big part of it and lived a big part of it. But we also had communities who were silent because of fear. They weren't a Protestant and they weren't a Catholic, and they seemed to have been left out of a lot of things. But they had a lived experience, and they had it hard as well as anybody else had it hard. And you know, we haven't even got the Good Friday Agreement implemented. And you know, I'm hearing from people that I work with them, why we're going to try something and do something else, because we haven't got what we've voted for yet, but yet they're going to come up with something else. I would have loved to see, you know, the time that they were talking about the maze and the museum then. I would love to see a place where our youth could go and be trained to be politicians and get that side of stuff and teach them and learn them. What I don't want to see is something that tourism belongs. It belongs to tourism, and it doesn't belong to the people here in Northern Ireland, North and South. I think it has to be a place that the community has a buy-in, because a lot of the places that have been built out of peace money and the attract tourism to Northern Ireland, which I know is needed. I have a lot of families, most of the families can't afford to go to them, can't afford to go into Titanic Quarter, can't afford to go and see the giants, can't afford to do a lot of stuff. So our social economical situation here, if we have to improve and educate the people who are living here day and daily, and yes, is a place for people who want to come and learn about the you know what I mean. I work in Shankill Women's Centre, and I don't have a week that doesn't pass that I don't have somebody from another country coming to find out about the Troubles. And they come to us, they come to the grassroots who are living it, who have lived it. And I think we cannot forget about that, because if you want community to buy into this, it has to be about community and the lives that they've lived, but also the lives that they continue to live. We have youth, very small portion, a very small minority of our youth that are out in interfaces every weekend, every week of the year, not just what happened 3-4 weeks ago at Lanark Way. Community workers are working with this every week, in and out. Bring a petrol bomb out and it's all over the media. We need to be looking to see what's actually happening and understand what's happening on the ground, because there's no point of putting a museum there talking about what has happened and what's going to happen and hope for the future when we don't have any hope for our youth. We have no jobs. We're living in poverty. We have the highest level of child poverty, you know, and we need to be investing, and that's the type of peace dividend that these communities are looking for. We're not looking at money through on us. We want the truth to be told, or whose truth's going to be told, without romanticising it, because that's what has got us to where we are today.
Eileen, thank you so much for that vital contribution. That's really important. I'm going to move next to Hedley Abernathy.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you to you and Irene for enabling us to be part of this. Really appreciate it, and certainly testify to the hard work that Eileen does in Shankill Women's Centre. And thank you, Eileen, for reminding us that this can't be a tourist attraction. You know, it needs to be owned by locals. It needs to be engaged in by locals. And I think one of the criticisms of the museum sectors and transitional justice literature anyway is that they're fairly passive and they don't want to really engage in the thorny issues of dealing with the past. So I'm delighted to see that you're actually grabbing that nettle, if you like, or grasping the third rail. And Olwen, you also mentioned Amy Sidaro as well, and Amy Sidaro would say very clearly you need to engage with the traumas and the violence of the past to create a new present and a new future. So thank you for reminding us of that. And it's interesting that Colin Davidson is I saw his picture there as one of your potential patrons, and you know, who better than Colin Davidson, who said, listen, I'm not simply an artist, I'm a member of a society and I want to make a difference. And his engagement with victims is very much testimony to that. One of the difficult things, I guess, and I'm a wee bit intimidated because I see Brian Lampkin in the room here, and in my own research I'm using some of Brian's stuff around collaboration and how we can engage across the sector as well. Sometimes we go into our own wee silos and our own wee corners and do our own wee stuff, but there's so much richness out there in colleges, in archives, with the Public Records Office, in libraries, with the National Museums of Northern Ireland, the Linden Hall Library, for instance. I suppose one of the difficulties is bringing all that together, and you know, sometimes I guess it's like herding cats, but the importance of bringing all that knowledge and the richness of that knowledge and experience together in the same space. But again, it's great to be part of this. It's a very worthwhile and very necessary discussion as well. So thanks for letting us be part of it.
Thank you, Hedley, for your contribution. Alan is next. Alan Leonard.
Hi. So thanks, Alan Leonard here. So I'm really excited to be in this session today. Irene talked about not to dwell on what didn't work for MLK, but there are good lessons to be learned, I would argue. I participated in one of the reference groups for a couple of years there. And presumably because I was involved with the Forum for Cities in Transition, which is an international network of municipalities around the world. And one of my jobs was to help organize 2 international conferences, one in 2010 in Derry and one in 2014 in Belfast, where we brought together delegates from all over the world to deal with living issues in a practical way. So some of the lessons I learned, and it's reflected in some of the comments here, was to make sure you have buy-in from all sides and levels. So Tom Hennessy pointed out the tricky bit about the politicians. And it was tricky then, and it'll be tricky today. And secondly, at the end of that MLK process, we had, I would argue, good stakeholder buy-in, and we had a great architectural design, but there was this awkward, pregnant, long silence when we were asked, what will be the programming? So I would underline, as John Brady has said,
Alan, thanks very much for that. Before we move on, Irene, do you want to say something about finance? I mean, that is obviously a huge challenge for bringing a very ambitious project like this to successful completion.
If I may, Peter, let me tell you two things briefly, because there are a lot of people who want to talk. First, I'm delighted that so many people are expressing an interest to be here and to talk. It's absolutely wonderful. I'm very surprised, because in the last 2 years, I've been approaching lots of people, almost everybody seemed very interested with the idea. So something will happen, I think. In terms of answering about funding, we're going to ask for funding for absolutely everybody. And we've been working a lot on that. But the most important, more than funding in particular, is that we get your support. As universities, as departments, as citizens, we need your support and your engagement more than anything else to keep the energy high, because there's a lot of work to be done. Can I, Peter, say a tiny thing to do with the interface in West Belfast, Shankill Falls? The tour guides there, they are already working together from both communities. So normally they have visitors and they show them what they think is their experience of the Troubles, and they normally introduce them to other people on the other side who are going to say something else. So the wish is there to explain all the dimensions or all the visions and all the angles. It is already happening, but of course we want to provide proper jobs to those people and a proper infrastructure to do their job well.
Okay, Irene, thank you. Let's move on. Guy is next. Guy Biner.
I wasn't sure I'm allowed to talk after Dom said he doesn't want to hear historians, but I'll say something anyway, nonetheless, if I may. I like the fact we're talking about raising capital, by the way, because of course memory is capital. And intellectual capital in this room alone is quite remarkable, just as Irene said. Just in this room alone, the amount of, it's even fitting that this is happening as a seminar in QUB, which is a leading center of Irish studies. I mean, it's all coming together, and you look at the list of people in the room at the moment, which is probably the biggest collection of minds in Belfast since the United Irishmen dined. But the points I wanted to raise are a few things. One, it's very important to be very careful of platitudes, and it's very easy to fall into platitudes. I'll give an example of a smart platitude, which is a bit dangerous. Olwen, if I may, pick on one line that you said, that there was a few, but I'll just pick on one. Amy Sodaro is a brilliant critic, but the line that memory of the past, violence, is the best inoculation against future violence, not necessarily. Coming from Israel, I can assure you that's not true. But just to go beyond that, a few quick traps which you might want to take into account as you go down the line. One is the trap of kitsch. Kitsch is always there. The kitsch of the Troubles. A lot has been said about Titanic. I would put Titanic in that bracket. Also, even the taxi tours on different levels. It has to have a critical edge, right? So that's one fear. Another is the trap of instrumentalism, being overly didactic. Of course, the message, as Thomas Hennessy says, and others said, it has to be about hope. And yet, this can be rammed down people's throat, even through the rhetoric of ethical remembrance, which can be problematic. It's overly didactic means it's problematic. It means manipulated. It's got to be open-minded at every moment. Another trap I'd like to put here is the myth of neutrality. You want the example? The Ulster Museum, great place, but it's always fallen into this trap. There's no such thing as neutrality. Neutrality is not being transparent. That's what neutrality is. There's always agendas. So of course the point around that is to be open about your politics at all angles and to be multivocal. multi-partisanship. There's no such thing as non-partisanship. And the last thing, perhaps, is the bleeding obvious, but worth mentioning anyway. I think there's prizes for bleeding obvious, so I'll give my 2 cents to that. Of course, there's a giant trigger warning. In fact, there's massive trigger warnings all over this museum. That's not a trap not to do it. It's a minefield, and you've got to walk into that minefield open-minded. But of course, you're dealing with trauma and the politics of trauma. Trauma is riddled with politics. So quite literally, there's explosive issues. This museum will, if it does exactly the mission that Rita mentioned, and Rita said it beautifully, it's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way. And that's good. That's good. And it has to do that. And yet, to do that, it has to be treated very, very carefully. So there's going to be trigger warnings everywhere. It's a space which, on the one hand, is a safe space, but on the other hand, it's a space which is an uneasy space on purpose. Yeah. It's to rattle people, and rattling them in order to be able to deal with these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. Insightful as ever. Let's move on to Ray. Is Ray here?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I go with Guy. I'm a little blown by the minds all in one place. I'm getting very, very excited by it. I come to this as a psychotherapist and as an independent politician who offers well-being politics as an alternative. One of the things I'd say is that we are all the same, and we are more same than we are different. That we do share a past, but we don't share memories of the same memories of the past. We have different memories. There will always be diversity, and one of the issues that we have looked at with the diversity today has been the usual. It's been the Protestant and the Catholic, and maybe we've gone to the kind of more well-off and the less well-off. I do come back to Matthew and Andrew's point where we started asking questions about our rural community, and Irene and I have been talking about one aspect of this project in particular, and what we've talked about is that it needs to be part of a network. It needs to belong to the rural community, and it needs to belong to the urban community, and it needs to belong to all manners of community. And one of the things that we see that when we kind of ask ourselves, how could we encapsulate that into something meaningful, we don't have to look very far. And we look at the rise of the whole Camino experience, where people will come from very different experiences to come and experience a collective engagement or meaning-making process. And so I see that in Northern Ireland, we've got the fortunate experience of the work that Pat's doing in Derry with the museum there. If we went along to the border area, have we ever asked what the border experience was of the Troubles? Ask Arlene Foster, ask Lady Herman. Ask Dylan Quinn, who's working there. Ask about the various centres that there are. Then we kind of move through and we connect all of these together. So I think if we get stuck in it belongs in a street and in a place and to a certain type of people, that we have lost something. So I would love us to come back to a conversation where we can create a community. And what do we get from a community? And this is where I'll end. We'll get social and economic benefit. We'll get people coming to staying over, spending money. We'll get job creation. We'll get good relations as communities mix and connect together. So I think there's a whole other area of this that I would really love to be a part of the conversation, where we look at the diversity of experience, how we represent it. We look at a model like Camino, and we look at how we could stretch that around Northern Ireland, not just building that historical understanding, but also economic benefits, good relations benefits, employment, etc., etc. So I think it belongs in a wider conversation, and it belongs to a wider group of people, and I'd love to be part of that conversation. Thank you.
Ray, thank you very much for that contribution. I can see Catherine Clinton is here, who's formerly of Queen's, now the University of Texas, who's a member of the board. So I might just ask Catherine to come in next.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to see so many wonderful faces and to be back in Belfast, if only virtually. But let me say that I'm trying to represent an international perspective, one that is very keenly attuned to the situation in Belfast now and how it's going to be reflected in the future. So I remember a project that I did when I first came to teach at Queen's, and it was looking at mentions of Northern Ireland in textbooks, English-speaking textbooks. And no surprise, very little mention. And if there was a mention, it would be one line about the Troubles. And there was lots of interest in a way in which we could reflect both the diversity and complexity of the region going forward. Being on the board has been wonderful, so many conversations, and one of them has been with language. And I know that people are very fixed to the notion of reconciliation, but I think many of us committed to this project are also very fixed on the issue of regeneration for that next generation, having a different perspective, having diversity is important, but also within this conversation that I've been listening to, let's not let the politicians in. Let's train the politicians. Certainly, let's have tourism. Let's not have tourism. So I think I speak also for the fact that please remember that over 10% of citizens of the US claim Irish heritage. They look to Ireland as a wonderful place to visit and learn. Now in the headlines, Northern Ireland has come into a lot of discussion, and many of my colleagues here in Texas, very interested in border issues on their own, are asking what is going on in the current situation in Ireland. And so I think of it as a bricks and mortar place, yes, but one that can build a community through networks. So many of you are talking about the needs of the people of Northern Ireland, the various communities. Know that this group committed to an umbrella bricks and mortar museum is interested in keeping a network, but we cannot resolve or reconcile all of our various interests until we can try to move forward. So I hope you'll be patient with us and give us a lot of interest. But when you talk about financing, what can I say? But with the current occupant of the White House, very much in favor of celebrating Irish heritage, I hope we can look forward to regeneration and perhaps financing this wonderful project. Thank all of you for your contributions. We look forward to working with all of you in future.
Thank you, Catherine, for joining us all the way from San Antonio. We're going to go back more local next and bring in Chris Majimsi. Chris, if you could unmute yourself. That's it.
Is that it now? Yeah.
That's it. You're good.
Sorry about that. Yes, I'd say all the way from Ballyhackamore. Not as far away as San Antonio. Yeah, I've been most interested. I've always been most interested. I've heard of this project for some time. I've spoken to Irene on a number of occasions, and I've been interested in the discussions here today. And I think we have to realise that if we do this correctly, we will. Well, locating ourselves on the peace line between the falls and the Shankill, I think, is the correct location. We must realise that tentacles will spread throughout Northern Ireland into the rural experience and also overseas. There will be difficulties which we'll have to come to terms with. For example, I cringed when Rita Duffy talked about the colonialism, and this is a colonial struggle, and we have to look at colonialism again, and so on and so forth, which is a very much from my community. It's very, very much a no. It's something that we do not accept. And if we came out heavy that we're looking at colonialism in Ireland, I think we would have difficulty getting a buy-in from some people. It's important that obviously we get as many people buying in as possible, but I think we can move forward. I know there has been difficulties because I've been involved a little bit in trying to get a better buy-in from the Shankill community. But having Eileen there is going to be very useful. But I mean, I think there are difficulties there that will have to be looked at as well. But I mean, if we were to listen to everything that everyone has said about all the difficulties, I mean, we'd all just turn the computers off and go home. And probably the fact that it's difficult, if it wasn't difficult, it wouldn't be worth doing. The fact that it's such a problem, clearly we're going to have problems. I think it'll be problems of definition. It'll not be problems of having politicians' views expressed, but it'll be problems of definition from all sorts of areas and from all sorts of people. And I think that that's something we need to work on as well, because we're going to have a sound base that everybody feels himself properly grounded in. And I think that's probably nearly the next thing that we need to be doing, to try and recognize the differences, but by the same token, try and get the solid base for the future building. Thanks
very much. Thanks very much, Chris.
Okay.
I think colonialism and Irish history is a topic for perhaps another forum on a different day, an important one we'll come back to. But Rita's just put her hand up, so I'll just let Rita come back and make a response.
I'm glad you're letting me.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Rita.
Okay, sorry. I'm glad you're letting me respond to that. Chris, your experience of colonialism and your community's experience of colonialism is every bit as valid as mine. And the very fact that you felt the need to, and the soldier, the man from the British Army earlier, it's not a matter of who's right or wrong. This is the reason why this museum is necessary. It's a matter of recognizing that that's where this narrative and this problem began. We were England's first colony, and the colonialism is being addressed around the world and will continue to be addressed for the next probably 50, 100 years. And I think we've got a very, very important part to play in that international conversation about the legacy of how Europe was built, how wealth was built, and how we resolve these issues internationally.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Rita. And I think it'll get me thinking about organising an event specifically on this and for the autumn to take this discussion further. But let's move on with our waiting list of people wanting to make comments. Deirdre McBride, you're next.
Thank you, Peter. That's a really interesting discussion and a really exciting project, and it seems to be that the word shared and the word hope, and actually that last point about actually deciding what the definition is, but also that the whole process of designing how inclusive this can be will probably could work really well if it was also arts led. And I think it's rather than, and I'll leave it at that. But great project, thank you.
Thanks very much, Deirdre. Karen, you're next.
Hello, yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Karen, you're good.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, I think the question, first of all, do we need a Museum of the Troubles? Yes, we do. I'll go to it. And I think the bigger question really is, where do we need a Museum of the Troubles? And I think we need a Museum of the Troubles in Dublin. We need one in London. We need one in Belfast. So I'm just commenting on, the Belfast version at the moment. And I would say a key issue, I think, will be the curatorial strategy. I'm an architect, and I've run a few projects in English schools of architecture about this very topic. And some of the students who are from all over the world, some were British, some were Irish, there were Chinese students working on it, and they came up with some really interesting projects, one of which was about a museum of 100 objects. So in that strategy, what he was proposing, that this was a local Norwich boy, he was proposing that local people in the area could each bring in an object that was of significance to them from their history and contribute it to the museum. And there would be a sort of a call for objects, if you like, that could be issued on radio stations, on television programs, and that this collection of objects could be dropped off anonymously, or these objects could be donated anonymously, or they could be donated with a named person involved, or there could be, family memories, anything that people wanted to contribute to this museum. So I thought that might be an interesting one to pursue further. The other idea that came up was one about lost streets. So if you were to take all of the streets that have been lost in Belfast, let's say, because that's where we were working when we were doing this project, you took every lost street and you found the original street sign, and that street sign then became an artifact around which a group discussions and conversations might take place. It's been done before in a museum, and I think it was in Liverpool, certainly somewhere in England, and there's one in South Africa as well, which kind of was based around these street signs. So there was kind of an idea of a lost community or a lost space that could be instigated through these artifacts. And I think that was a really nice idea. There's actually an article about that in the book called Mapping Cultures by Les Roberts, I think. And then the other idea was about a murals museum. I thought this one was probably a bit contentious, but anyway, the murals museum would be, rather than re-imaging murals, as they were being re-imaged, they would be photographed and reinstated or physically cast onto concrete panels and collected for posterity in a big museum somewhere. It was beautifully designed, that particular one. It was designed by a guy from Hong Kong. So, you know, I think the students had some lovely ideas about how to engage the local community in terms of, you know, what kind of objects would be significant to them. And I think, you know, it's a shame just to paper over things that are contentious, like murals. Personally, I love to go and see the Posters Museum in the Linenhall Library, where you can get a sense of what things meant to people, and you kind of get a beginning to understand. You sort of get a bit of an understanding of what these various different political issues meant to people at the time. I'll stop rabbiting on because I've talked for long enough, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Karen. I've just seen Brian E. Widdis, who's working with the Centre for Public History in Queen's, has just posted in the conversation box a link to the conference she's organising on Irish museums and colonialism. So if anyone's interested in that, just click on the link. I'm going to move now to Fergal McGarry of Queen's, but currently across the pond in Boston. Fergal is one of the patrons of the Museum of the Troubles project. So Fergal, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. I just wanted to say a few words of support for the project. I think it's a really interesting and really important project, which I'm happy to offer my own support for. I suppose I'm coming at this from my background as a historian, and also as a historian who's been involved at working with museums, including the recent museum that was developed around the Easter Rising at the GPO. And also I worked with the Ulster Museum on the redevelopment of the Troubles galleries. And I think actually both of these projects raise similar issues as has arisen here with the debate over colonialism. And it's not rocket science, but I mean, one of the really obvious ways of dealing with these contentious issues of how we interpret the past is really just to embrace a multiplicity of perspectives. You know, you include the voices of people who think that Northern Ireland is essentially a colonial kind of conflict, and you also include the voices of people who feel that kind of framework isn't appropriate. And I think that approach has worked pretty well. The other point I'd say about history, I can understand the frustration of other people from other disciplines, and I think it's really important that we take insights from disciplines such as anthropology and memory studies and so on. But I think ultimately people do approach things like the Troubles in terms of their starting point is they want a historical narrative that sort of sets it in context. And I think that's always going to be an important dimension of what people expect, and also how maybe people understand complex issues in terms of stories, you know. And I think that's the strength which history can bring to in interpreting the past. So in terms of, I mean, I mentioned the GPO Museum and the Ulster Museum, and I think they're very successful in their own way, but I think all museums have their own kind of responsibilities and perspectives, and I think that brings also certain kind of limitations. We think about a museum like the Ulster Museum, it has a duty to be very even-handed, and people have talked about some of the difficulties around this kind of the notions of neutrality. I think in some ways some of the single identity museums are much more gripping in how they tell stories of things like Bloody Sunday, but then they also have their own kind of agendas and responsibilities, which can be equally problematic. And what I really like about the project here is the notion of centering the idea of peace. And that as a kind of a narrative for approaching and analysing the Troubles. And of course, that makes us think back in terms of the Troubles, but also forward in terms of, you know, what the museum can do now and moving forward into the future. Just wanted to touch briefly on a few points which have risen again, and these are just my opinions. But I think place is important. I think the Maze is potentially a great site for a museum, but perhaps not for a museum with this particular narrative. It's got so much baggage, and it's associated with kind of a, I suppose, a more kind of a politicized interpretation of the past. I really like the idea of something centered around Lanark Way, a position like that. It just seems really obvious, a really ideal location in terms of what this museum wants to do and who it wants to serve. And I think I just endorsed the comments too about how Northern Ireland is really appallingly underserved in terms of the facilities that we offer to people, to reflect on what has happened in this place over the last 50 years. And I think in particular, school children and young people are really appallingly served in terms of the lack of initiatives that are happening in this area. So that's another reason I really welcome this idea. And then the final point, which has also been mentioned by a few speakers, I think it's really important that this is done. I mean, it will probably need some kind of state funding, but I think it's really important that this is done at a remove from the state, at a remove from kind of formal politics. I think we've had so many examples, particularly around issues of addressing the past, which have just made it clear that political structures are really not capable of, I think, developing a project of this. It'll just get bogged down into one of many kind of issues. And maybe just a final point I'd make is the decade of centenaries hasn't been without controversy, but it's been considered to be probably the most successful kind of commemoration we've had of very difficult events in the Irish past. And one of the really positive I think aspects of that was the sense in which the Irish government stepped forward and provided a kind of a pluralistic framework and funding and so on, but it didn't actually try and drive or control the narrative itself, but it basically empowered groups, communities, artists, and that was a particularly important kind of dimension of the commemorations to basically generate their own kind of meanings and interpretations of the past. So I don't think it's rocket science. We have some really good examples of kind of models of commemoration and reflection that have worked well. And it's great to see that there's such a consensus, maybe not about what will be in the museum, what the museum will say, but about the importance and the urgency of having a museum like this.
That's great, Fergal. Thank you very much. Let's bring in Jeff Dudgeon. You there, Jeff? You need to unmute yourself. Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Jeff. Are you there? We'll come back to you. Let's move on to Pamela Emerson. Is Pamela there? Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm coming now. Just thank you very much for allowing me to contribute. A bit of a different sort of look at it. About 10 years ago, I did an MA in Cultural Heritage and Museum Studies. And as a group, we had as a project to design a Museum of the Troubles as part of our module. So basically just looking at that, we did, like Deirdre had sort of said there, envisage the use of arts within this museum. So some of our ideas were like, there was a lot of open glass areas and they were etched with poetry of different types, but relating to the Troubles. We had sound bites, which were people's reflections. We had a cinema set up within it. And in the cinema, there was films, there was newsreels, various different things were being shown at different times. There was a cafe where people could come and talk, which was something that was mentioned about nowhere to talk. There was a meeting and conference room where there was speakers and debates. In the garden, we had sort of like sculptures and things, a bit like the Big Fish, you know, by John Kindness, where different pieces of newspaper articles were put on it. There were stepping stones with dates and events. Then we had exhibitions, which included the personal artifacts, which Karen was mentioning there, and also prison crafts to give the story of the prisoners and what they did and how they occupied their time of whatever persuasion they were. We had a music room, and in it there was different instruments, there was recordings, there was live music sessions. People could tell their stories through music. There was also the education centre where there was crafts and arts were being held, and there was readings by authors and historians. And we saw this as like a centre where people could come, different people could tell their own story of the Troubles. There would be artifacts, there would be living things of art, and there would also be a lot of spoken and musical voices as well. And I just think that, you know, if there was something like that, it's not the traditional look of a museum, but this was all very considered. The 6 of us that were in the group considered this over a term. It wasn't just something that we came up with, you know, sort of as an idea. So just if we could like to feed that into the current thinking. Thank you.
We cannot hear you, Peter.
It's me telling Jeff to unmute himself, but of course I was muted myself. Jeff, there you are. Great. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I was a councillor in City Hall a few years back when Irene was promoting the idea of a Troubles Museum, and I got her introductions to some of the movers and shakers in the hall. And I have to say I'm a bit neutral on the subject, and was then, because my particular interest was advancing the idea of a city centre art gallery in the city. Now that didn't move to conclusion, and we, in the meantime, the city deal arrived, which was very large sums of money, including 90 million, I think, which was to be devoted to the Belfast story, which may still be a project on the go. It was vaguely notioned to be in the old Bank of Ireland in North Street, but to be honest, I thought it didn't have a purpose really. So I'm just wondering, in some respects, if we could blend the two ideas of a city centre art gallery and the Museum of the Troubles with the Belfast story, and create something that would appeal to maybe more people, more than just those interested in our past, but also in aspects of our past, other aspects. I mean, the problem is, and we experience it in the discussion on colonialism. I mean, I'm of the belief that England was the first colony of the Normans. We were the second colony in many respects. So, you know, these things, you know, how far back do you unpeel history? So legacy, as we all know, is a living conflict. Nothing has been sorted out in that department. So in any ethnic conflict, they're going to go on for eternity, effectively. So, you know, you just have to buy in and move against things as you go along. And many people have done huge things. And in Belfast, the £2 million was granted to Republican groups putting forward museum concepts, one on Roddy McCorley and one on James Connolly. So there's big money has been given for museums. There's plenty of other museums. There's the Orange Museum as well as the Ulster Museum. So I think this has got to be somewhat original in its concept and design, and different. And as Catherine Clinton said, you know, it's about regeneration in many ways, and it's also about bringing in tourists, because they are the people who go to see things by and large. I mean, quite often locals never go near museums. Thanks, then.
Thank you, Jeff, for your contribution. Eileen, did you want to come back and make another point? Just unmute yourself. We can't hear you, Eileen.
Thought it was ready, but never. Yes, just a couple of things have been mentioned, and Lanark Way has been mentioned on a couple of occasions. And I don't think you'll get a buy-in from the community there. Now, I'm not just talking about the Greater Shankill, I'm talking about there's a number of residents groups in that area, and I personally don't believe you'll get a buy-in for Lanark Way. It's an area that's it depends. It doesn't matter where you put that. If it's put on one side of the wall, it will belong to Protestants, and if it's put onto the other side of the wall, it belongs to Catholics. And that's just the makeup. I've had a few conversations with people that I know on the Shankill, and Chris is quite right. It's going to be a hard sell. But in saying that, I think it's a good thing. But I think what we have to remember too, yes, although the conflict and the Troubles was doom and gloom, we had brilliant fun. We had laughter. We had communities coming together. We had communities working together. We had women who were still doing protesting together. Shanklin Falls protesting at the Mater Hospital, or the Royal Victoria Hospital, when they were going to close the maternity unit. So there was a lot of stuff that women done at that time, and there was a lot of fun. And women were very creative to keep their kids away from trouble. I just heard a story the other day where I thought it was absolutely fantastic, where a couple of the women from West Belfast that I work with said that their kids were kept stoning the police on the way home, in the army on the way home from school. And her and her neighbour got together and wrote all the kids' names down on all wee pieces of paper. And they tore the wee pieces of paper up individually. And when the kids were coming home from school, the helicopter always came out. So they threw the bits of paper. And they said to the kids, that helicopter's only after throwing out a whole lot of paper. Go and pick it up and see what it is. And the kids were picking up their names. And they were saying, oh, they've got my name, they've got my name. They never threw a stone again the whole of the Troubles. You know, so there was a lot of things there that it doesn't always have to be about the fighting. It can be about other things rather than just the conflict. And I think when you sell something about a conflict, we still have an awful lot of pain. We still have an awful lot of questions that hasn't been answered. We still haven't got people who've got their justice. We have some people who haven't even had the truth. But if you tell there's two sides of the conflict. One was about uniting communities within communities, and the other one was the violence that people had to live with. But people got on with their life, and I think that's the story. I think that's very empowering, no matter where you go. And I would be of the same as what Jeff said there. There's the White Bank in the Lower North Street. It's big building. They can't get anybody to take it on, or even better than that. Let's take it to the Crumlin Road jail, the big courthouse that's sitting on the Crumlin Road that you'll get for a penny. You'll get for a penny, and there's already plans for it. And I think, you know, you're getting an attraction from all over there. And I would be a bit sympathetic for our rural communities as well, because they never really get a say in a lot of stuff that happens, which they had been affected very, very badly and still do because of the isolation that they suffer.
Eileen, thank you so much for that. I'm going to take one final comment, and that's from Nick Baker.
Thank you so much. I'm coming to you from Toronto, often called the Belfast of North America, so appropriate. One thing that sort of surprised me, I suppose, about this conversation is there seems to be a assumed antagonism between community and history. And I don't necessarily see how that can manifest itself really productively in a setting like this. So, for example, speaking of like objects and things like that in the museum, without contextualizing what these objects are, they mean precisely nothing to anyone who exists outside that community, right? And so I suppose it's just a matter of striking that balance, from my perspective, at least for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. So thanks to everyone who's contributed this afternoon. It's been absolutely fantastic discussion. I think I might just hand the floor back to Irene and Olwen if they'd like to make any final statements or reflect on what they've heard this afternoon.
I'll just let Irene finish up. I think that'd be very appropriate.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I'm so thrilled by this event today. I'm sorry not everybody did manage to talk, but I can promise we're going to put lots of energy into this project. I'm very happy you like it, and we are going to make it happen. So I only ask you for support. I ask you to be in touch with us, and we'll make it happen together. It will be difficult, we know that, but I think it can be done, and we'll have other discussions, hopefully other forums. Thank you so much, Peter, for this opportunity. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much again. It's been a really worthwhile event, and again, I just encourage everyone who wants to take this further and carry this conversation on to get in touch with Irene and with the team at the Museum of the Troubles and Peace. Just one final announcement for those of you, again, with an interest in the Troubles past. We are going to host an event in our studies, again online through Teams, on 1971 and the crisis of Northern Ireland in 1971. On the 25th of June, it will be a kind of one-day event. We'll be advertising that in a couple of days on our Eventbrite channel. So if that's of any interest to people, please register and join us in a month's time on the 25th of June. That's all for this afternoon. Thank you all again, and good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.